Good morning, everybody. This is James Morris. I've had a lot of people comment on the 5.3 low oil pressure video I've made that's on YouTube over the last 6-7 months. I made that a couple years ago, matter of fact. But anyway, people have been finding it on YouTube, and it's about low oil pressure. If you have a Chevy 5.3, 4.8, 6-liter, any of the Chevrolet engines out there from, say, 2001 up, if you have a low oil pressure light when it first cranks up in the morning and it won't, or you hear a ticking sound, there's a way to solve that or to diagnose what's wrong with it. Is it an oil pump? Is it a bad engine? What is wrong with it? So here's what I'm going to give you a little hints in. I'll kind of review it again. Is if you've got a car that has low oil pressure and you're absolutely sure it's got plenty of oil in it, that's the most important thing. Is if you think it may have something wrong, here's what I want you to do. I want you to overfill it by at least 1, maybe 2 quarts of oil. Now, this is not a permanent solution. This is just a solution to point you in the right direction to what you need to do to correct this problem. I want you to overfill the oil by about 1 quart, maybe 2 quarts. I want you to jack up the rear end of the vehicle if possible. If you can do it, please do that with a floor jack. Try to jack it up as high as you can. That way you're pushing the oil towards the front of the engine. What we're trying to do is ascertain that the O-ring on there that is on the pickup tube is not sucking air. And if you tilt the engine forward by jacking up the rear and adding a couple quarts of oil, it will seal that up with oil. So when the car cranks, if your oil pressure immediately pops back up and you have good oil pressure sitting there at idle, you know your problem is going to be the oil ring. The O-ring on the oil pickup tube. It's early in the morning. And that's what needs to be correct. And to repair that, you're going to have to remove the oil pan. Now, it sounds pretty easy unless you've got a 4-wheel drive vehicle. Then it gets a little bit more difficult because you got a lot more things to take out of the way to get the oil pan off. But that's where you go on that one. We had a customer who drove in yesterday all the way from Hosford. And their complaint was on their 5.3 2009 engine with 216,000 miles on it. They has no oil pressure or very low oil pressure. And I'm going, okay, let's go for a ride. We go for a ride. Oil pressure seems fine for me. I got my scanner on. I'm looking at it. And I'm saying, okay, what is your problem? I mean, show me what's going on. I don't see any problem with it. Your oil pressure seems fine. And he says, well, there's times when I crank the car up and we'll be driving and the oil pressure will drop to 0. And I go, oh, it does, yeah, the light comes on and all that. And I said, well, what have we done to correct it? Well, then he says, well, we had, up there and where I live, we had a mechanic put a new oil sending unit on it. I said, did he replace the screen underneath the oil sending unit? Because on these engines, there's a screen where it has fuel management system on it. They use oil pressure to shut off the cylinders when you're going down the highway from 8 cylinders down to 4 cylinders. There's a little screen that gets clogged up with trash because people wait too long between oil changes. You know, I was talking to the customer. I said, how long do you change your oil? Yes, we do. How often do you change your oil? Every 5,000 miles. I said, well, okay, that's good. What kind of oil are you using? And they mentioned the name brand, just a regular oil. I said, this car requires a synthetic oil or a minimum of synthetic blend, Dexos approved oil. I said, if you're running anything less than a synthetic blend, which you are, that's going to be a big no-no. I said, it could be a possibility your low oil pressure could just be that screen is clogged up, the oil sending unit's bad, or you could have something more nefarious inside there, such as a bad oil pump or bad cam bearings that have pushed out. That's right, cam bearings, if they're misaligned, if they're not in the right position, they will starve the engine for oil and you'll have low oil pressure. That's another story. Anyway, we checked the car out, made sure what was going on, pulled the oil sending unit back out, and then checked the screen. The screen it was about half clogged. It really was. And on the, I got ahead of myself here, but when I was talking to the customer, I said, what kind of oil are you running in it? He said, we were trying to get higher oil pressure, so we put in 20W50. When he told me that, I kind of looked at it, I said, 20, you did what? I put 20W50. I said, this car calls for 5W30. Anything heavier than that, you can ruin the engine because it won't pump fast enough to get in the small little orifices that we need. 20W50 back in the 70s was wonderful for cars with the tolerances they had. We had 1 to 3 thousandths of an inch in the connecting rod journals. Here we have 6/10 thousandths of an inch. That's right. I mean, that's 2 thicknesses of human hair stacked on top of each other. That's 6/10 thousandths of an inch. and that is the clearance you have, and that oil will not get into the bearings. It will not do a good job. And he said, so you telling me that a thicker oil may make my oil pressure lower? And I said, I know it seems counterintuitive to think that, but here's what we're going to do. Bear with me. We're going to make sure your screen is not clogged in there. Pull the oil sending unit out. Put another screen in there if it's bad. And then we're going to change the oil from 20W50 to 5W30 and see what happens. Well, we did. The oil pressure popped up a few pounds. It really did. Now, we changed. I don't know if the screen had something to do with it or the oil. But we put in 5W30, got rid of the 20W50. And at idle, we had 22 pounds at idle in gear. At 1,000 RPMs, we had 29 pounds. This is in neutral. We had 29 pounds at 1,000. And at 2,000, we had 33 pounds. And at 3,000, we had right around 40 pounds. And he said, well, it always used to read 40. And I said, well, sir, according to the manufacturer right here, these are the specifications it's supposed to be. And you're well above them. I mean, at idle, at 1,000, at 2,000, at 3,000 RPMs, I don't know what to tell you, but 40 is not what it's going to be at idle unless it's cold. And I said, and it's going to be a little higher cold because it's a little thicker, and that's normal for it to be a little higher. But at 210 degrees Fahrenheit, your oil pressure is perfect. I want to recommend you run 5W30. Don't be running anything but full synthetic oil, because that's exactly what the problem was on this car. They had not been running full synthetic oil in it, and it built up sludge. It feels like grit, whatever. Anyway, that sludge clogs up the screens, and there's screens in all today's newer cars in the oil galleys. There's screens for what I'm talking about, going to the oil sending unit, that helps control the fuel management system. There are screens on variable timing components, such as VVT solenoids. They have those, and people that are going 7,000 a day, 5,600. I guess you can go to 5,000 to 6,000 miles without any trouble. I haven't seen too much trouble, but when you start going much more than that, things start to happen. Remember, oil filters only will filter up to about 4 months, or about 4,000. 4 months. Up to about 4,000 miles before they start going into bypass. And I mean, that's a rule of thumb. It may be 5,000, it may be 6,000 on some cars, but a good rule of thumb is this, what we've seen over the years. At 4,000 miles, most car oil filters are already clogged up. They can't do any more filtration. That's it. They're done. Remember, this filter only costs, when you buy it brand new, if you went to the parts store and bought it, less than $5. So it's not an eternal oil filter. It's not going to last forever. But after about 4,000 miles, it's in bypass mode. It's filtered all it's going to filter, and to keep from burning the engine up, it just says, whoops, got a little spring in it. It pushes the filter up. It lets the oil bypass. That's how that works. So that's why I tell people, if you're one of these people out there that says, well, I can go 10,000 miles between oil changes. Okay, you can. I don't recommend it. I make lots of money on people who do that, but I would recommend that you not do that. But if you're going to be one of those hardheads out there that say, I change my oil once a year, change your filter at least twice a year. I mean, and just add a quart of oil. If you're, I have some people out there that are adamant. My owner's manual says once every 10 to 12,000 miles. I just say, okay, fine. So you're going to save about $100 a year not changing your oil. Skipping oil change, going, you go 12,000 miles a year on average. Some maybe a little bit more, and you change your oil once a year and instead of twice a year at least. So you save that, and then when I see you about 80,000 miles, you're complaining about a timing chain rattle when it cranks up, or you're complaining about a check engine light that's on due to the variable valve timing components that don't work anymore because of sludge. These are the things that cost lots and lots of money to fix. It does. Just to be able to change a variable valve timing chain on a Ford with variable valve timing components, VVT. By the time you put the chains, the solenoids, the cam phasers, the tensioners, the runners, the gaskets, the seals, the oil filter, the oil, the antifreeze, put all this together, you can have a $3,000 to $4,000 bill in a heartbeat. How much money did you really save not changing oil but once a year? You didn't save any. You lost money. Now, Ford doesn't say change your oil once a year. They recommend changing it, if I'm not mistaken, on that engine, they were telling people over 7,500 miles. And then finally they said, that's really too long. And they said, let's do it about every 4,000 miles. And that turned out to be a lot better, but they still had lots of problems with the 5.3 engine with the variable valve timing, and they realized that they got to change that oil more often, use a better oil, and that's the key. If people who have the 5.4 engines from Ford, the Triton engines, if they will change their oil more often, use a full synthetic oil, just like this lady with the General Motors product that calls for Dexos approved oil, and they weren't even using Dexos approved oil, but if you'd use full synthetic oil in either one of these cars, I wouldn't have had half the problem. They won't have half the problems they've got. They wouldn't be having to spend all this money to fix a problem, because it would have never been there by using the right oil. That's the importance of using the right oil and changing it often enough. I know too many people out there believe that changing, they believe the 7,500 mile myth that General Motors came out with a few years ago. And General Motors has paid for it dearly by doing a lot of replacement of timing chains and cylinder heads and lots of engines, because they encourage that 7,500 mile. They've shortened it now to 3,500 miles. They cut it in half. Why? Because they realized the filters couldn't handle it, the oil couldn't handle it, the oil got overloaded, the filters went into bypass mode. The next thing you know, they're changing timing chains, cam phasers, all these things being changed under warranty, which they don't like. No one wants to do that under warranty for free, except the customer. So that's why I'm saying, please, if you don't know about what oil to use in your car, look in your owner's manual, find out what the right oil to use. Remember, you're a severe service driver. You're not a normal service driver, so rip that normal service out of the owner's manual. You don't belong to it. You don't need it. You need to follow the severe service, and normally those mileage and time is cut in half compared to normal service. So if it says change your oil on normal service every 7,500, cut it in half. If it says change your antifreeze every 150,000 miles, cut it in half. 75,000. It says change your spark plugs every 60,000 miles, cut it in half. Do it every 30. If you'll do that, you won't be visiting the shops with broken down cars that require lots and lots of money to keep fixed. That's just some of the little hints out there, just by changing your oil. Something as simple as changing your oil and getting the car looked at on a regular basis will literally save you thousands of dollars in new car payments and car repair, and the inconvenience of not having a car that you can use because it's in the shop. That's one of the things I try to tell people. If you get your car on a regular basis, you won't be broken down and have that inconvenience of not having your car ready, because that's where freedom lies. Individual freedom is where you can be able to go where you want to go. That's part of it. Not all of it. That's part of it. Where you do what you want to do, to go where you want to go, when you want to go. And that's the thing about autonomous cars we talked about yesterday. If that comes into play, you may not have the, quote, freedoms you wanted, but it's coming. I mean, the technology's out there. It's amazing what's going to be happening. I'm excited to see what happens. And we're going to have Brian Armstead. He's going to be calling in just a minute. We're going to talk about the Kia Stinger. I think he went to Hawaii and got to test drive it in all sorts of environments, from sun to snow to sand to salt, water, you name it. I think Hawaii is the only state in the union that has all four climates all at one time. Anyway, this is James Morris. We'll be right back with Brian Armstead, so don't touch that dial.